Hey everyone, I hope you can hear me all right. It's been a while, hasn't it? I'm sorry for such a delay. Whatever reasons, hey. A lot of it is preparation. A lot of it is actually this subject of perception. I underestimated how vast it would be. I'm forever adding little bits and pieces to my notes to discuss, and even like last second right now, I'm still adding like little epiphanies or whatever. And to be honest, I think it's such a big topic. It kind of underpins the majority of life itself. You know, I'm sure people have written books on perception or words of that sort of nature. And yeah, it's just a very, very big topic. So I already know that I'm going to be doing a bit of an injustice in discussing it. There's going to be a lot that people can probably contribute and add. So this will be your chance in the chat to, if you've got any nuggets of wisdom you want to throw in there, by all means. And so I feel like I'm going to, as part of this injustice, I feel like I'm really scratching the surface. And there's going to be a lot of spin-offs you could probably take this conversation in. Maybe there'll be topics for another time. But c'est la vie. Let's just share what we've got, I suppose, and there might be something useful out of it. Now, the video I made, the perception video I made, I had to take a lot of stuff out to condense it and make it poignant and stop it rambling, the sort of presentation and things like that. So for the first part of the stream, if you haven't watched the video, well, you're in luck, because we're going to go over it, and I'm going to be stopping it every so often, every minute probably, to expand on some of these points I was making in the video. So I'm going to do a commentary on that video. So let me share the screen. I hope the audio will share. If not, please. So hey Cuban, hey Iridium, and hey Silver Bullets, welcome. And whoever else is coming. Now I'm gonna have to like multitask. On top of trying to pause the video, I've got timestamps of where I want to interrupt it. So how can I need more than one screen here. Okay, let's start off. Now, as a loose definition, perception is picking up data you notice. With so much information in the environment that could be overwhelming, we select what we want to absorb. This forms our preference and helps us to filter what is relevant. We piece together bits of information to form a picture and understanding. It structures the basis of your reality. Okay, so was that little section okay? You weren't hearing echoes or something? Okay, so as perception is overall subjective, your experience of reality is also subjective. So reality is subjective. And this is how you can have people saying, in a way, my truth, and it being true. But how is it when we hear people talk about my truth, we know they're not really talking about reality, objective reality, truth? How is my truth wrong? There's going to be a lot of discernment throughout this conversation as well. So bear that in mind. This is the sort of nuance where through interpretations, well, you could be tricked for a start, but how things can be packaged in such a way where on the surface it appears genuine, but there is a ulterior message or meaning or subtext or connotation involved. So how is it people can say my truth and it be correct and wrong simultaneously? Well, we already just mentioned that my truth, yes, as a literal statement, is sort of true. We all have our version of reality. We all are subjective to our own reality. So we all have a version of my truth. But on the other side, when people use this in a deceitful way, they are trying to well, they're not factoring in the objective truth, because there is my truth and there is also the truth. And this is what they're overlooking. So often when they talk about my truth this and my truth that, they're never really talking about the truth. It's all subjective based. So they're kind of admitting their bias in a way. And in doing so, translation, what they're saying, instead of saying my truth, what are they really saying is my lie. This is my lie. This is my lie I tell myself, and this is the lie I want you to listen to and believe, as if it were the objective truth, as if it were the reality. Now, if you cannot accept the truth, the reality, well, if you cannot accept the truth, you are not accepting reality. So it is a bit of a kind of, when they say that my truth thing, it is a bit of a confession of what they're up to, that this is my lie and I reject reality, and this is what I want you to sort of to believe. So I want you to also lie to yourself and accept what it is I'm telling you. If done improperly, an imbalance could be built in that negatively impacts decision making. Despite how potent facts can be, important details might be missed. Context, for example. Okay, is the audio all right? Are we able to sort of hear the video and me jumping in? Freebird, good to see you, and JR, good to see you as well. So what was that about? Facts. Facts don't necessarily mean truth. And context is needed. So look, here's a quick example. Right. Is it factually true that you broke into the house? Okay, yes. So you're implying in a way that, okay, we have some sort of criminal here, right? But what if the context is I broke into the house because it was on fire and there were people inside that needed rescuing? So that's why great to understand, like, you can't just take bullet point facts as explaining the situation to give you a context. Now here's going to be a bit of an uncomfortable point to make for the red pillars amongst us. This means also, because if we say, for like, if red pill is supposed to be the truth, without any context, it's just, unfortunately, it's just a perspective, just as valid in a way as blue pill or black pill. They're all equally, they're just perspectives. And red pill on its own doesn't give you the complete truth. It's out of context. So bear that in mind when you're trying to live a red pill lifestyle or philosophy or whatever it is, when you're talking sort of red pill, to not box yourself into a narrow-minded sort of lens where you can only see it from a red pill viewpoint. This isn't to invalidate the red pill. If anything, look at it as a way of like, okay, right, I need to be a bit more open-minded or aware, so that I can, when I do use the red pill, it could be that much more potent. Because otherwise, if you're just using pure red pill, you'll sound like a complete lunatic in the end. And then no one will listen to you. Facts on their own don't necessarily mean truth, and these gaps in perception can give the wrong impression. And if someone were nefarious enough, they could take advantage. Right, someone could take advantage. So they can rephrase, you could say something quite literal, quite factual, a statistic. And if they were nefarious enough, they could reframe that and either target you, attack you, or misconstrued what you're saying. So that's why context is very important, and meaning as well, so that things aren't misunderstood. And a lot of this will also come down to the way in which things are communicated. So it's very important to have a good communication. And part of communication is understanding what the other person is perceiving, what they're hearing. Like, are you resonating? Are you getting through to them, kind of thing? And the kind of language in which you speak. Otherwise, they might have selective hearing and not understand and miss out on what you're on the point you're trying to make. It is not possible to get a 100% representation of reality. An approximation that is good enough to be compatible with the real world will suffice. You can still make decisions that go against the information you've received. Reality is okay with this, as long as you can perform within its parameters when necessary. Okay, here's another ouchie red pill moment. So, in a way, what this is also saying, therefore, it's okay to have your blue pill moments, so long that you remember to be red pill when it counts. And you'll be surprised that, as much as people like to think they've got potent red pill and they're always using their logic. Hey, if we're realistic here, logic gets tiring after a while. You have to have some downtime. And so you'll probably be surprised how many sort of light blue pill moments you have throughout your daily experiences. It could be down to something silly like your choice of clothing, or let's say you're decorating the house and you're thinking of what color to paint it, and you're like, I'm going to paint it whatever color. Well, a red pill, a critically minded red pill, if we're using that in a literal sort of sense, would say something like, it doesn't matter what color you paint it, as long as it's got paint on it. So you choosing your blue pill, you choosing your color, the decision, the color choice you make will most likely be determined from a kind of blue pill point of view, because I like the color red, or because I wouldn't want to paint my house red particularly, but my kid's bedroom is kind of like a mint green, so it's like, okay, I like that's the blue pill choosing the color of the bedroom wall. But so it's okay to have your little, don't beat yourself up because you might be having you might feel like, oh, I'm being a bit of a wuss here, or I'm being soft, or I'm being kind of feminine or something because I'm choosing something I like. It's okay, as long as it doesn't infringe when it counts. As long as you don't let your emotions run away with you, you'll be all right. So, and this again really would help, if that makes sense, like grammatically correct, strengthen your mindset, because you're being responsible for the red and the blue, and knowing when to use with discernment, when it's appropriate to use them, and to what extent, and in what manner. So there are, so in a way, what I'm also saying is like, we shouldn't look at the blue pill as toxic, evil. Ugh, keep that thing away from me. Hey, it's okay to have a bit of fun in life, because if you're just red pill all the time, where's the fun in life? So it's all right to venture into fantasy, into dream world now and again, just as long as you know that you're doing that, you have that self-awareness. Reality actually encourages you to dream. Slipping into our own little private worlds within its superstructure is actually quite common. It is necessary and beneficial to have a bit of a break from time to time, maybe indulge in a movie. You only get one life, but in having these excursions, you have the freedom to experiment and try things in safety. Reality can only provide you so much, so it allows you to fumble and grow through other channels in hopes that you can find meaning and such to complement it. This isn't an excuse, meaning you're free to just live in La La Land permanently and make things up. It is important to regulate awareness of when you're being imaginative and when you're being down to earth. It is your responsibility to be aware of these things as best you can. If you can. Right. So basically what I just said. An example is like Kush, I hope you don't mind me using like you like model making. And in a way, those model making moments is a practice, is a form of imagination. And if blue pill, if we say blue pill is like your imagination, your fantasy landscape, then not a direct comparison of like a emotional sort of type of example, but in terms of simulating a alternative reality, i.e. in this case like model making, scale models of the real things. And so with these hobby skills, you can transfer that into reality. You could then look at your fighter jets in the real world and have a better understanding how they were built and how the aerodynamics would factor in. And you could also, for example, make predictions. And when we talk about predictions are things that haven't actually happened. So it's kind of it's imagining the future. It's running these simulations. It's using your imagination in such a way that you are, and this is where fantasy and reality can complement each other. And there's going to be a lot of balanced talk, talking about this side and that side, and right and wrong, and like up and down or whatever, like these contrasts. So a life of just pure reality isn't really good for you, and a life of pure fantasy isn't really good for you. We want to find a marriage in between, and where one can help the other. So yeah, I'm sure everyone's got little examples of hobbies and things where they let their imagination, they play with their imagination and theorize and things like that. Well, arguably, you're using a blue pill mechanism in a very productive way, and it's a kind of safe way. So maybe I'm giving a different sort of definition to what the blue pill is seen as traditionally. But perhaps it needs an update, and perhaps this is how what I'm describing is how it should be implemented, instead of this juvenile form of idealized fairy tale style. Can't tell the difference, you have a problem. Every so often, you must pay homage to reality. Okay, another example that comes to mind here. So, if you cannot tell the difference, okay, I don't know how many of you watch Star Trek. In Star Trek, they have what's called the holodeck. It's like a virtual reality room. Anything can happen there. They can manifest objects and create whole complete worlds within the holodeck. So where this is a problem is some people, I'm sure there must have been episodes in Star Trek where this has happened, where people don't realize they're actually inside the holodeck. It's like being inside the Matrix. Or they deliberately want to live inside the holodeck. Okay, why would sounds great, right? Like if you can create a realistic world just to your liking, why wouldn't you want to do that? And I suppose you could say people are trying to do that right now with AI and virtual reality anyway. Well, what's the danger in this? What's the problem if you're plugged into or you're locked into a room where your wildest dreams can come true? Is that room is contained within reality. So by blocking out the real world, like in Star Trek, if the ship was underneath attack or blowing up around you and you're inside a room where everything is sunshine and rainbows, you had no idea. You can see where this is a problem. And even if you suddenly were unplugged or you stepped out of the holodeck and you realize that everything, you have no you're not even up to speed with what's happening around you. So this La La Land is still dependent on reality functioning in the way that it does to allow the holodeck to facilitate. So even though you might not have an awareness of what's happening in the outer world, in reality world, you are still bound to the laws of physics therein because you are still in reality. And as a result of this is why it can be still important to care about what other people may think and feel and what they do, because they're part of that reality with you. You might not like it, obviously, but you need to acknowledge that there are people with their own thoughts and feelings and such. Because if you're trying to make everyone do as what you do or think like how you think, then what you're trying to do there is you're trying to make them enter your subjective viewpoint. It's almost as if you're the one who is living in a virtual simulation and you're trying to get everyone else to agree with you, which would indicate, therefore, that you have a bit of an insecurity there. Like you're stressing out because you can't control everyone or everything around you. So, and that threat of the outside world or people being different to you is like a signal that things could ruin your subjective point of view. Hence why you're wanting them to agree or think like you. But yeah, so that's part of reality. That there's going to be crazy people, and instead of trying to stop them, maybe just learn to deal with them. Like if someone wants to shave their eyebrows and look like a clown, I ain't gonna stop them. I think it's kind of funny. It doesn't impact my life. I'm not threatened by what these donuts are doing. So having awareness, you know where to draw the line. Like I'm not gonna have one of these clowns be a babysitter for me, So you draw the line. You have a boundary. So having awareness doesn't necessarily mean you make allowances. And that comes back to that discernment. It's like how much of that are you willing to tolerate, or at what point does it actually become problematic or interfere with your life? As painful as it could be to receive a kick, if you think life is being mean to you, right there you should question your perception before it becomes victimhood. Proceeding, we have interpreting. This creates a sense of meaning, and from there, beliefs are formed. If we question what is the meaning of life, without first asking how am I interpreting life, we will not consider the merit of our profound answer. No wonder then, if what you interpret is pain, you derive the meaning of life to be suffering. This is not wisdom. This is what you have experienced and attached meaning to and created a belief around. People who are hopeful have interpreted differently. They may have had the exact same kind of experience, but always seeing sunshine and rainbows is not an accurate depiction of reality either. So this is where a bit of like one-sided views or statements aren't really tested thoroughly enough to eliminate these sort of blind spots. And you might say this is like confirmation bias. But this is why it's important to listen to other people's points of view, even if they're wacky, just so that you can kind of calibrate, and so then you realize that I'm not the crazy one here or something like that. But calibration anyway. And and in a way, we're doing this in sort of real time by you guys listening to me nattering away. You're reviewing what you already know with the additional information, hopefully, that I'm providing to verify your own hypothesis, is that the right one, or theory, for a better understand. You're calibrating what you know with what I'm providing here, and upon a bit of reflection afterwards, ruminating or whatever afterwards, you get a bit more with calibration. You end up with a bit more refinement, and there'll be other things that maybe some of what you were thinking before would be validated. You'd be like, I wasn't the only one thinking this. Okay, Billy just said something that relates. Okay, great. Or maybe bring up more questions. I mean, I like the other option where it's like I make you question more, which can be annoying, but the curious mind is a healthy mind. So yeah, we're kind of practicing this in real time right now, and I do the same when I'm listening to each and every one of you. I'm comparing and contrasting, reviewing, calibrating, refining, organizing. It's a big process, multi-layered, and this is what growth is in part what it's about. Now, in comparison with the sort of more mentally unhinged type, try and be respectful, Billy, please. They struggle to be able to do these sort of to implement these skills, these tools, to a better overall understanding. And as a result, this is why they have poor self-awareness and a poor grasp on reality and understanding of reality, and they struggle to navigate through it because they don't know how to process all this information. I'm not saying that we have it, we've got it completely under our belt and we know exactly how to do it, but as part of your upbringing and growing up, you learn how to process, children, for example. We're talking about children here and there. They are novice, so they can't control their emotions, but as they grow older, they learn to control their emotions, hopefully, and have a better understanding how to process. So people who are mentally ill or disordered, they have a problem they have many problems, but that being one of them. And as a result, you can see the ways in which they conclude the worldview that they have, or the distorted perception that they have. In some ways, it's like, this isn't an excuse to let them off the hook. It's just to have an understanding of, like, you can see why it happens. Like I was going to say, like, you can kind of be a bit sympathetic that no wonder they they have things so misconstrued if they haven't got the tools available to them to be able to process the information they receive. It's like a sensory overload bombardment, and typically I think is quite, well, we would say it's trauma. So it's devastating. It's dramatic, kind of horrific, sensory overload, disorientating, scary, and usually being scared and fear, the need for control, and then hypersensitivity, hypervigilance, hyper this and that. You can see where it's coming from. Let's proceed. It's hard for humans to balance both viewpoints at the same time, resulting in all or nothing. There is suffering, but there is also happiness, and there are things in between. Along the way of forming a worldview, attributes are added to create a system of operations. How to conduct yourself accordingly, your ambitions, motivations, purpose, your ethos, your principles, rules, socializing, relationships, and gradually you become more stable and secure depending on the reliability of your perception. So this is talking about being more secure now. So with time, you become secure not only because you're adding these attributes, but your trust in these attributes increases. And as that increases, that soothes and eases this hyper attentive, on living on the edge in uncertainty, because you can not only trust yourself with your attributes, and you've got some tools now, you've got some experience, but you can also sort of trust your environment and the world that you inhabit. And with this self-assurance in such a way, you don't have to constantly be asking yourself, am I all right? Am I like, is my life, am I in danger mode all the time? Am I are they out to get me? These sort of paranoia kind of things can ease off. And again, this is that kind of double-edged sword thing where sometimes you do need to be asking yourself, like checking in on yourself, like, how am I feeling? Am I okay? Because we all need these reminders, and it's part of the warning system that we have in case things do go off track. Now, when things are too comfortable, you can become complacent and neglectful. So it is good and important to exercise it. But this is the difference between now and again needing to check in on yourself just to sort of verify, compared to constantly never knowing at what point you're going to be attacked, the world's going to end, or what the hell's going on. So you can see where that's the difference between someone who's secure and being responsible, not taking it for granted, with someone who is just insecure, constantly needing reassurance and validation and looking after. Now, I can give you there's quite a lot of diabetic lessons that I could sprinkle in. One of them is a blood test, because if I don't do a blood test, I have no idea what my sugar levels are. And you can get, I can feel generally when my sugar levels go up high, and when they're low, hypo. But it's very common that if you're always running a high sugar, after a while, that will start to feel normal. And then when your sugar levels drop to a normal range, because you're so used to having your sugar so high, you'll have hypo experiences. You'll think you're having a hypo when really your sugar is actually at a normal level. So that shows you the normalization in effect, if you're not careful with time, that you get used to things being a certain way, and this is why with the particularly cluster Bs, when things are calm, or when they are actually loved by someone, it's foreign to them and it actually makes them uncomfortable. They prefer chaos because that is what they're used to. Chaos brings comfort to them. If someone is, it's almost like they have more trust in people overtly attacking them because they know where they stand than a friend. They're more suspicious of kind gestures because they're not used to it. And bear in mind, this is a conversation about perspective. So, from their point, just have that as a thought in the back of your mind. That remember, we're talking about perspectives. So far, so good. All is well when you can make sense and archive information accurately. Okay. All is well when you can make sense and archive information accurately. This is a human need, by the way. Like, to be able to make sense, like, it's important. You need to know this. So if you can't make sense, you're kind of screwed. So being able to archive information accurately, and this is a human. Now, this is an interesting point here. The crazy people, they're despite trying to create an alternative reality and live in La La Land, they are, because this is a human need, they are still trying to do this point. They are still trying to archive information accurately. They are still trying to build a system, a structure. But obviously, it's going to be harder for them. So this need of, because it's not established, they are in a constant state of trying to establish it, which in part makes them hypersensitive and on the edge. So this sensory, they're trying to pick up on all these little clues and everything like that. Why? Because they're trying to create a structure for their fantasy to stand on. But because it struggles to stand on their structure, it's in constant maintenance. And they're just piling in all this sensory stuff, which isn't helping them. So it's kind of funny in a way, because despite them trying to play their own little game, they are still playing the game of life. And in contrast, like for normal people, even though they might not quite have a full understanding, their life isn't completely structured or whatever, they've got those attributes we were mentioning before, like the ability to trust, to know that even though I haven't got everything in place, I trust myself and my environment well enough to know that I will be okay. Misinterpretations. Having insufficient data or the inability to trust perception leads to distortions in thinking. This is partly why it can be difficult to spot, because it resembles reality. These errors can cause interpretations to become out of touch. So, one of the tactics these people might be using is by making a slight shift, they give you a little bit of space to allow you to fill the gap. So, although they're trying to, they'll argue, like, provide you with insight or something, they rely on you to make the connections to fill these gaps in. This is the mental gymnastics. And because it's you that makes these connections, we're going to cover this point in more detail in a later on section. But because it's you making these connections, you're more committed to believing whatever it is they want you to believe, because it's like you found that You have that eureka moment. You have that epiphany. This becomes your truth. And this is how magic tricks work. By you making assertions, jumping to conclusions, and as a result, these are your conclusions. So you're that much more committed because you don't want to be wrong. It's very uncomfortable, even for healthy, for everyone. It's not nice to be wrong. The difference is whether you're secure about it or not. So, like, I think this next part of the video is going to cover what I'm about to say. But so for normal, secure people, they can afford to be wrong. They could be mistaken, and it's the fraudulent who pretend to have the humility, and see it as only you could be at fault. So if they say, "I'm only human, I'm not perfect," something like that, these are cognitive understandings. This is a cognitive understanding that a charade must be preserved. They have to preserve their charade. They have to appear as if they're human. However, there is more. There's more to it with these kinds of statements. So it's a sign that they are aware of their perception. But when it's uttered, it's usually at a time when their fear of exposure or their loss of control rises. So pay attention if someone says that, "I'm only human, I'm not perfect," pay attention at the time at which it was said, and see whether or not there is a fear of exposure or the loss of control taking place. Now, these statements are a projection. They project these statements out to keep themselves pure. And what I mean by that is because these are like a no-brainer statements. Of course you're human. Of course no one's perfect. So you will relate to it naturally, and you will agree no one is perfect, and we're all humans. So as you're being dumped on to receive this projection and accept it as true to you, like because you see yourself, you go, yeah, I'm human as well. I'm not perfect either. So this is a true statement. You're no longer thinking about how human and imperfect they are, and instead the focus is on you. So if you're going to accept this about yourself, theoretically you're supposed to accept whatever it is they're saying. And what they're saying really is I fear being human, and I fear I might not be perfect. Because what's the contrast to this? Because what am I saying here? I want to be more than human, and I want to be perfect. So when they say this, they're not really addressing you. They are addressing their fear, and they're trying to project it. They're trying to get rid of this fear, and that's why they're saying it. For normal, actually, before we carry on, throw this in as well. Because if you were to call their bluff on this and say, okay, if you're only human and you could be wrong, could you be mentally ill? No. Could you be deluded then? And they won't really like hearing that. So it's a bit of a red herring. They throw it out, and because as soon as they throw it out, they immediately tell you how right they are. Because their ego has been restored, not humbled. They feel better about themselves. So now they got that kind of grandiosity reinserted, and they proceed to bash you around the head with it and tell you that that they're right and you're wrong, and they know what time of day it is and all the rest of it. So the deceitful type of people don't want to really linger on this point. Otherwise, maybe you'll really start to think they're unreliable. If what you're saying is true, that you're only human and you make mistakes, then maybe you're making a mistake right now. So they won't linger here. They just throw it out there as a red herring, and to offload this fear, make you accept it about yourself so that you won't question them. And sometimes they might add in a little nervous laughter, like, oh, I'm only human, or like a meme moment, like a fake smile or whatever, a goofy smile. So it's a sign of they're under stress. This is a stressful point in time, and this is a sign of releasing some of that tension. And you can see that they're struggling to manage all their shenanigans, for lack of a better word, all this gymnastics. Secure people, upon realizing there's been a misunderstanding, typically they're interested to want clarification, and some growth takes place along with gaining better self-awareness. They might be a little shocked or surprised, maybe say something like, I had the wrong idea, can't believe I used to think like that, and perhaps they're relieved to have noticed the misinterpretation. They manage to reattach to reality, are secure for the most part. They don't need to trick, and they can allow people to have their own opinions. They can afford to theorize because they have self-awareness. The corrupt, however, won't theorize. They instead make them. So, yeah, it's just an observation. That's a little tool there, a little for everyone. Like, you'll notice, like, can they theorize, and how are they coping with the theorizing? Like, because they might try and disguise their demand in a theory. Like, they might propose to you, what if? It's like, okay, what if? So they are contemplating, but it's kind of like, what if A, B, and C, but you can only accept B. So it's no longer what if then, is it? You're not giving me the freedom to make my own mind up for myself. You're telling me what I should be thinking. So what's with the what if? And you'll notice the part with the validation here is that because, well, if we take it from the point of view of reality provides you with the validation, you don't need to validate yourself in a way. You sometimes hear that as self-help, like, you don't need anyone's validation, you validate yourself. You don't even need to do that. Reality will validate you for you, because who you are is an extension of reality. We'll cover that as a point in a little while. But who they are is created inside a fantasy. So and who they are is merged with their fantasy. So if they got nothing to validate them, they have to outsource this validation, and this is where you come in. So these interactions you have with these people, in whatever capacity, validates their existence. So you have to be a bit more. When we say ghost, we need to be a bit more like adhere to that, because plenty of us are still playing these games thinking it's. I mean, I did say earlier on, like, there are crazy people, you need to learn how to deal with them, but you need to keep that to like the utmost minimal, really, because even these minimal encounters is still validating them. It's still well, signaling to them that they exist and they matter. When, well, as people, yes, they do, but as in terms of a sense of self, there isn't one, because it's built into the fantasy. So so just be mindful of how you validate without even knowing it. And it might not be something that you can particularly control either, but it's just bringing up their needs, because of for secure people, they attend to their own needs, right? So they don't need to outsource particularly, and everything is kind of tickety-boo. But for the insecure people, as a result or a consequence of this insecurity, they need taken care of. So people who need taken care of have high needs. They have a lot of needs to be attended to, and this is one of those needs. Let's proceed. Mars. Upon knowing you're dealing with an imbecile, you must change your own perception and eliminate the idea that you're dealing with a rational person. The deceitful may try to adopt these principles. Okay. Ooh, bit of an ouch. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to have these interactions, but if you're going backwards and forwards for a long time, it's becoming a feud or something like that. It's like, who's the greater fool, the fool or you, or are you the fool for messing with the fool? And what's that pig? Don't wrestle with a pig in the mud because the pig loves the mud, and you'll just get yourself dirty. So it's that kind of thing. Like, and when you fight with them, you're actually giving them your power. I know what they're trying to do is trigger. They're trying to trigger your defense system, your ego, so that some narcissistic traits that you may have, so that you'll defend and invest, because suddenly now it's very important to you, and that's getting you on the hook. Now you won't abandon them because you want to stay and fight or defend yourself. So you're ultimately you're handing over power, and you're losing a bit of self-control and some other bits and bobs in the process. So yeah, this is a moment really where there's a lot of questions you should ask yourself rather than of them. That being, like, why is it important to you to have to convince this idiot? Especially if you've already determined they're an idiot, what are you trying to do here? What do you expect will happen? How much energy are you wanting to invest into this thing? What is it you're trying to prove? Why are you being a bit reckless and not thinking about yourself anymore, or as much as you should be? So why are you like neglecting your own self-care? Why are you getting yourself riled up, unnecessarily? Why are you making yourself frustrated? And a painful one is, are you curious about who they are? Are you curious to understand them because you struggle to understand yourself? And that question is a very profound one in the narcissistic community. This is why there's such an obsession in terms of the manosphere. This is why there's such an obsession with talking about women. Well, one of the reasons is because you don't have a sense of self. It's not very well formulated. You don't know who you are. You're still self-discovering, and it's easier to look at the other and try and figure them out, to then reflect off and have a better understanding about yourself. So there becomes an obsession in the other. In terms of children growing up, they don't really have a sense of self because they're still young, and they don't have a real sense of the world either. So as they grow up, they look at how reality is presented to them, how it's structured, and once they have a bit of a grasp on the world they're living in, they can then point and identify, that is the world and this is me. A distinction can be made, but it doesn't come until you've understood what it is you're dealing with, the other. So could this be what you're doing when you're getting into these entanglements and these fights with people? Are you trying to better understand yourself because you don't know who you are? Because you're in. It's hard to see yourself from your own head. You need an outside perspective, and one way of doing that is to look outwards and look around you. Who are you? You want to get a good idea of who you are, is look around you and see what kind of people you're hanging out with. So is that what's going on here? Are you trying to find your identity in someone who is mentally ill? not very Not a good way of doing it.
As a way of pretending to be secure and go undetected. But watch how they can't let their pathology go, and how much it bugs them. For people who aren't secure in this sense of being mistaken, all of this is horrifying.
Okay, so it's horrifying. So what am I describing here? Because they can't follow through. They can't do what the normal people are doing. You know, going through these learning they don't have the effort, the interest, particularly to want to do it. But it's delayed. They want, you know, normal people understand delayed gratification. They've had to build their lives up. They've had to learn gradually, step one, step two. These other people, for whatever reason, they don't have this growth journey, and so the idea of now having to backtrack and learn from the beginning when they've had it kind of good up until now, they managed to get by, um, is horrifying to them. And if they did things the proper way, it would probably kill. Like, this is the mortification process, or what they call as mortification. It would kill them. It would mean that who they are up until this point is rendered like useless, inept. It needs to be erased, and they need to start over. Now, so, you know, some people would be like, "Hey, that sounds like a bit like a blessing in disguise, really. If you've got the opportunity to start over again, why not take it?" But to them, this is, they cease to exist. They would be dead, you know, psychologically speaking. And when they talk about karma, in a way, this is it. This is karma. They know, they know there's a fear, there's a breaking point in the future that's gonna come. This isn't the tax man is gonna be come knocking at some point. So it's kind of like they're trying to enjoy the ride while they can. They're trying to enjoy their delusion and get away with what they can while they're still able to. So they kind of, with this karma idea, they kind of sort of flaunt it at people. And what does it mean, really? It means it's another projection that of their own fear. They know their karma is gonna come along one day in the future, because they can't. The body keeps a score, and so they flaunt it at people and wish other people would receive their karmas, and they know it will hurt them like really bad. So, uh, so because it will hurt them, and they believe everyone else is just like them, as part of projection, they believe that karma will hurt other people. So they try to flaunt this karma at you, like, watch out, you people, you're gonna get, justice is gonna get you, and it's gonna hurt you. You don't know that for a fact, you know. They might be fine, but ultimately, basically, what I'm saying is, when they talk about people receiving their karma, there is another projection. They fear their own karma catching up with them.
Presented with a twisted landscape, where without intervention, fabricating is required to make sense. A low resolution of an alternative reality starts to form. As what is relevant takes priority, the created landscape is mainly a projection of insecurities.
Okay, I know I'm interrupting it a lot. Sorry about that. So, it's a so this world forming, this alternate world, this bubble, and it's created. It's not a happy place. It's a place built mainly from fears and things like that. So only things inside this bubble exist. Outside the bubble does not exist. Therefore, your viewpoint or reality itself does not exist. And sometimes you might see them glitch. You'll catch them out because uh, because a sort of byproduct of interactions that they need to have. Sometimes they'll be able to see, you know, like you'll provide some information, you'll spit some logic at them, and they're following what you're saying to a little degree, and that glitch moment happens because you manage to suspend the fantasy for a brief moment. But when that happens, you cause them to split. So splitting ties in with cognitive dissonance. So in that brief moment of them glitching is a brief moment of cognitive dissonance. They have exited their fantasy for a brief moment. It's suspended. They are now living in the real world. You brought them there. It's very uncomfortable for them, painful, and so they decide to jump back into the bubble as quick, immediately. So you cause them because you pull them out of their bubble for a brief moment, and that now they're in the real world. You've just made them vulnerable. And really, if we're talking about before, where, hey, you need to be able to sort of jump in and out of your reality and fantasy and know when you're doing it, they cannot connect these two worlds together. And this is why it's a dissonance. 1 minute they're here, 1 minute they're there. They can't hold both worldviews at the same time. They can't see how, like right now, all of you listening, you know that you're in reality, but you also know that simultaneously you're also living inside your own head, right? We can kind of sort of say tongue in cheek, we are living in a fantasy within the reality we find ourselves in, or something like that. It seems kind of paradoxical, but there it is.
Fears and concerns become magnified. To calibrate now in this state of detachment is dangerous. Jumping to conclusions with a narrow viewpoint is necessary to block out data that would reveal the mental leaps in logic.
Okay, so another human need, stability. Now they have a problem because their fantasy is forever changing. It's not built in, like reality is rigid, it's structured. Their fantasy is wishy-washy, so their fantasy changes, and because their identity is fused to their fantasy, that means their sense of identity, their sense of self, if there is even one there, is also in fluctuation. So they have an unstable sense of identity, and there's nothing, because they're in this sort of bubble world, there's nothing reliable that they can ground themselves to. Now for normal people, this isn't a problem because you ground yourself, you be grounded to reality. And as a warning for those in reality, so if you lose touch of reality, you will lose sense of your identity in the process. Your identity and reality are your identity. This is where you get your identity through reality, from as an extension of reality. So yeah, I mean, maybe we're straying a bit from perception. The topic was perception, but how you're seeing the world anyway, as a overarched sort of statement. Okay. Oh, no play.
The goal is to work backwards and make sense quickly, not to add to confusion.
Okay, work backwards, not add to confusion. Or jump to a conclusion first, and then work backwards. So why is this the case? Because the objective here, the name of the game here, is survival. I must win. How? Oh, you mean I have to figure out how? Okay, bish bash bob. Somehow, right? But the first point is I must win. Right? I must survive this. I would win this game of survival. And because I haven't bothered investing in any life skills, They got lazy effort, poor thinking, and low resolution and narrowness. They want it easy. Entitlement as well, which is like, it doesn't really matter, just give me what I want to win. So the world that they create, this fantasy world that they create, is to meet this goal, this need to survive. It does not need to be fleshed out, at least not initially. It doesn't need to have 3D or depth or color. It just needs to exist. And to flesh out this world, to give it character, shape, and form, is something they would hate to have to. They don't want to have to do this. To give life to it. And so, because their world is unstable and isn't really fleshed out, this fictional world is formless. It is without form, no boundaries. So it's a very simplistic motivation. And as a result, they need to be careful in a way, because this makes them very gullible, very naive. They can be easily taken advantage of, and they can't help themselves. So in terms of, women like to talk about how they get taken advantage of all the time. What they don't realize when they say this is that they're not thinking about consequences, because all she's thinking about, she's unconsciously admitting that all she cares about is winning. I wasn't thinking about the journey, what could happen along the way. I just thought, whatever the end result, conclusion, I just thought my dream would happen. And somewhere along the way, it didn't happen, so I must have got taken advantage of. You know, in my notes here, I wrote down that their stare into oblivion is trying to stay locked onto the objective that has jumped further away. It's like you've taken it, it's disappearing along over the horizon. No. So it's the fear. So their staring into space is a fear that, oh no, my goal of winning might not happen. I might not win. So that look is not, sometimes people say it's like a look at their processing. It's not really, because it's not thoughtful pondering. It's not like they're actually using any real brain power to contemplate on anything. It's more of in a robotic sense of like prompts, like command prompts. Restore, get back on target, danger, panic. You know, it's the look of, imagine being on imagine being stuck in bed on life support, and then someone comes along and unplugs it. That shock horror. That's the sort of stare. That's how I see it. That's my interpretation of it. Perception goes haywire and lasers in on distress. So in the emergency room, there'll be all sorts of machines hooked up, giving information. But what's the main one that sticks out the most? It'll be that heartbeat that goes flatline, that tone. And all they're doing is they're waiting for that tone to start beeping again. At which point they'll come out of that stare, their paralysis. But yeah, so this is the problem. I'm going off on a tangent here. So the goal is to survive, to win, and then work backwards and hope it works out. Fingers crossed, everyone. Because if things don't happen the right way, then catastrophic stare, system failure. Yeah.
It is easier to believe it is a ghost you saw Even easier to believe you are personally oppressed than to suggest your senses are unreliable. In this distorted world, they can.
Okay, I know some of you will be like, I think I saw a ghost, right? Um, this is the difference between I think I might have saw a ghost, versus I fucking saw a ghost, man. I'm telling you, I swear it. Okay, that's the sort of difference I'm talking about. Um, and what's the problem if you come to the realization that your senses might be unreliable? What does that mean? It means danger, doesn't it? It means that I might not have a fucking clue what I'm doing. Like, I don't know what's going on anymore. I might be going mad. So it's important for us to be able to trust our senses and have that established. And this is where unfortunately, the mentally ill, disordered, um, they out of desperation, uh, instead of calibrating or checking over, clarifying, that was what I was looking for. They just trust the misinterpretations too much, because what else are they going to fall back on? So that's why it's out of desperation.
Now explain where they are and what it is they are seeing. This brings much needed security, and interpretation reframes the misunderstanding as new knowledge, truth, and fact. At this point, a closed system or circular logic has now formed. All the things we say that are good for you, confidence, fortitude, resilience, endurance, and so on, are contaminated to ensure that the person can stay protected or trapped inside a bubble.
So that circular logic is the life support I was just describing, and it's important to have this locked down, like established. So it doesn't really matter what the truth is, what the knowledge or the fact, as long as it's not the real truth, knowledge, or fact, because that is toxic and poison. So any excuse basically will do. Any alibi to get out of facing reality and to have this world exist doesn't need to have structure or form at this point, doesn't need fleshing out, it just needs to be there, like a hollow. They talk about hollow earth. I wonder where they get that from. Maybe that's a projection. Hollow brain. It doesn't really matter, just so long as it gets the job done. They just need an arena, an empty arena, for them to be able to battle out this competition of I need to win the survival war. Yeah, so it just needs a skeleton of a framework, because that is the human need to be able to place your footing.
The fear of what perception may uncover in the real world.
Sorry. Before continuing, right, here's a bit of a caution for people giving out advice. So confidence, endurance, all that stuff, right? Perseverance, etc. Contaminated, leverage, the inverted and perverted. Normally, that would be sound advice for fairly secure people who haven't detached from reality. But given to insecure, unhealthy, delusional, whatever types of people, only serves to keep them there. Like, as example, just say one of the sort of self-improvement things is, hey, you need to be a bit more selfish. You've been too much of a giver. Well, they will take that to mean, oh, perfect. You mean I have even more reason to be selfish than I already am? Or let's say you tell men to be more stoic. They'll interpret that to mean, oh, you mean I need to be more stubborn then, do I? You need to have more. People need to have more empathy. Equals, oh, I need to be more virtuous, and you need to be more empathetic towards. People should be more empathetic towards me, so they need to be nicer to me. Oh, okay. So you can see how they kind of get the wrong end of the stick. So when you give out advice, you need to know your audience. Are you helping? Are you delivering the right message to the right people?
Prevents any investigation, which is like a form of diagnosing, from taking place. This includes pausing for thought or exercising critical thinking. These
Okay, so fact checking, because diagnosing or having a bit like exercising critical thinking with them, running their logic through, you're diagnosing them. Now, most normal people would like to have a diagnosis. Oh, you mean doctor says, oh yeah, you got a problem? Oh, okay, help fix me, but not these people, because diagnosing pops their bubble. So which is why they don't want to be scrutinized, they don't want to be criticized, they don't want to be fact checked, they don't want to be investigated, diagnosed, basically. Now, there is an exception. They would be interested, like they might go to therapy, for example, but it's not with the intent of being corrected or fixed or attended to, or whatever. It's so that they can learn better about themselves in order to be better manipulators. It's like, oh, point out where I'm slipping up, where my mask slips, or where I reveal my cards, so that I know how to better cheat next time. So they turn. So really, when people get diagnosed, it's quite a sensitive time. They're opening up, they're being vulnerable, and this is why secure people can be okay with it, because they can be okay with vulnerability. But for the more toxic people, they turn this vulnerability into a way of staying strong. I know, again, like I have to keep reminding myself, we're talking a lot about behaviors, but I have to keep reminding myself that this is in the context of perception. So I'm just trying to show like both, how you can see both sides of this of a scenario play out. There's your point of view and there's their point of view.
These are dangerous practices for those who want to stay in their bubble and avoid accountability. Boundaries are not limited to just healthy people. It is the unhealthy who have the strongest of boundaries.
Yeah, that's a fun fact. Yeah, there we are talking about everyone needs to have boundaries. So the unhealthy, the toxic, they have the most strongest, and this teaches us that there's more to boundaries than just drawing a line in the sand. Because the toxic people form a boundary is that very rigid stone wall, impenetrable bubble. So because it's very unstable for them, in a way, this boundary that they implement tries to contain it and keep sort of very loose air quotes, keep it sort of stable, help stop it sort of spilling out. But the only consistency they have is that of being inconsistent. It's like what we're trying to do, or like health professionals or whatever. We're wanting, as one of our expectations, is we're trying to bring order. We're trying to bring form and structure to that which is designed to be disordered. It's not supposed to have order. It's not supposed to have structure. It's not supposed to have form. And this is where this is our mistake in thinking, well, wouldn't you want that? I mean, it would seem to be a good thing, right? It kind of works well for the rest of us. I'm sure it would do you good. And yes, it would do them good, but that's not what that's not, this escape from reality isn't designed to be that. What you're trying to do is if you were to inject your structure, your form, and order into their fantasy, you are trying to inject reality into fantasy. You're trying to turn fantasy into reality when you do that. The two shall not mix in that way. So that's a mistake on our part for expecting to make sense to them. So yeah, you're trying to bring enlightenment and objectivity to them. They don't need that. What they need is your interaction. For you to play games, play along. And you're doing it when you're trying to play these games. That's what you're doing. So it's a job well done, I guess. Oops. An interaction is their form of self-care. That's you attending to them. It allows them to act out this theater show, and that makes you a co-actor or performer, and you're playing a role with them. And usually you're the villain and they're the hero. You know, and they're the victim. They're the victim hero. You can actually, if you wanted to play, you could actually troll them if you wanted to. You can go, okay, play along with the, now that you realize you're playing into a fantasy role play, you can kind of play along and pretend to understand their madness. Play it back to them, like, oh yes, I was outside and I saw a TV antenna, and suddenly I don't know, just come up with some crazy thing, but suddenly a second head sprouted out of my shoulder. It was my conjoined twin. I didn't know I had. I'm a believer now. I don't know.
Which is why it's so difficult to get through to them. They believe what they want to believe. Despite them telling you so much that is true, with their unquestionable weight of evidence, they still need you to say it's true. If it's not working out how they would like, which it won't, you're typically blamed for not believing hard enough like they are, or your thinking is wrong, or you tricked them. There is some sort of magical reasoning, anything, that will maintain a perception of belief where they are not at fault and you are. There is nothing wrong with them, and their ability to interpret isn't malfunctioning. Deception has been inserted as a precursor and controls perception.
Okay, so yeah, so deception comes along. Now this is so they're rigging, they're setting up a bias, they're screwing around with their perception deliberately, and they use deception to do this. And as a result, that means their whole world building, this theater, this construct, their sense of fake identity, all of this is built on deception. It's all an illusion to trick you and them, mostly them, to trick themselves, but they need you to help with that. And so what is actually true is placed inside of their lies. And again, another projection will be that they'll accuse you of the one being deceptive, gaslighting, tricking them, and all this. It goes into that victimhood. So it's all a big show. It's all an illusion. It all comes under perception, appearance. They don't really need to actually live or exist. They just need the appearance of it. I don't know, this is why I find it kind of fascinating and strange what it must be like living inside their head. Do they even feel like life is real, or does it all feel like a dream to them? Do they even know if they're alive or dead, kind of thing? Um, so that's all that sort of matters in a way. It's all that matters is the belief, and that belief to not be true. This weird kind of like they'd be happy to believe anything as long as it wasn't true. Okay, I'm sorry this is taking ages. Let's proceed. We're getting there.
Working just how they want it. It's amazing how their fantasy becomes your responsibility, and thanks to you failing them, you've made them oppressed. They really are seeing a boogeyman, and it becomes a real experience because they can no longer tell the difference. Their conviction tantrum is part of this deception/perception mix to bully you into giving in. Plenty of conspiracy theories and magical thinkings are built upon misinterpreting data. These require fuel to sustain them. Reality, on the other hand, does not and will continue to exist. Reality is independent of perception. Trying to use reality's infrastructure to molest public perception to support these magical claims and drown out evidence on the contrary invites questioning criticisms. These objections, however, are converted into perceived attacks.
Okay, so easy one with the victim. So this stops you from your assaulting questions and try and make you feel guilt. You hurt my boohoos, and now make you responsible to make them happy. So you're supposed to apologize for bringing some realism to the situation. Stop it with your reality. Yeah.
Awareness. In spite of this denial of reality, there is to some extent self-awareness that they are being deceitful. They are aware enough to understand quite accurately how you might perceive things. In these situations, they don't inhibit their perception. It is powered to be hypersensitive, and all information is collected for consideration. This tells us that their perception isn't actually faulty as such. It is not that they've overlooked something. They've chosen not to acknowledge it.
Okay. So it wasn't an accident, like how some of us may have been misled, because they're not embarrassed by it. This isn't like a loose screw or an illness. Their brain is actually working properly. It's working how you expect it to work if you were messing around with it. So fundamentally, what has happened here is that they didn't learn how to process information or how to cope with stress. And this makes the accountability worse because it means this is how they chose to address the situation out of desperation. So instead of knuckling down, they took the easy path out. So, you could, like, you might think it's sort of out of fear, poor education. You might say bad parenting and upbringing. It doesn't. Sorry, excuse me. It doesn't really matter what the reasons are for how their brain structure has developed or how the connections have grew into place. Regardless of the reasons, they were the ones that pulled the ejector seat lever. They pushed a button to eject themselves out of reality. So it comes down to them. This is why it's a choice they made. You know, you can sort of have sympathy that, okay, yes, they were terrified and all the rest of it, but if we're looking at who had the finger on the trigger here, they had it. They're the ones that pulled the trigger. Yeah, and so now they're screwed, because this is loyalty of the utmost, in a way. Like, we talk about healthy relationships having loyalty and commitment. Well, this is such a commitment, such a loyalty and a commitment. Well, because they have fused, they have merged and meshed with their fantasy now. As a result, they have lost who they are, their sense of self, in part intentionally. You know, they don't really want to be the true, authentic self, because it let them down, and there's other conversations about that. So they have found salvation, air quote salvation, and merged with their fantasy for the ultimate protection inside their bubble. So you can't separate them, unfortunately, anymore. They are joined at the hips, fused at the hips. And that's how it is now, you know. So yeah, let me check. There's only 3 people listening. I've bored you all. I'm so sorry. So sorry.
It highlights that they are selective and control it. When it comes to having perspective about errors they might have about themselves, they block it out to allow themselves to get away with what they want. In both scenarios, perception is functioning as a form of defense to keep them strong. Protection from the outside world ruining things, and protection from their own inner knowledge that they've created a fantasy. Fleeting moments of realization are pushed aside by the ego's compulsion, forcing dissociation to happen. Yeah, but that doesn't apply to me. Or, yeah, but that's not what I'm doing.
Okay, those comments, if you hear something, well, you won't really hear it said like that, but the way I phrased it there, it's actually quite snarky. It's sort of like suggesting, yeah, it's possible, I suppose, if it's you that has bad, if it's you that's a bit crazy, you know. Oh, if you want to think like that, yeah, I can see how that might be true if you're delusional, you know. So it's a snarky remark to try and put you down, as if your point of view is the one that's dubious. And there's also a level of contempt built into it by sort of minimizing and being dismissive. You know, your viewpoint is not being taken seriously. And in putting your viewpoint down and dismissing it, it's asserting that this other person, like the ill person, knows what's what, and is the true viewpoint. And this is in part what the bubble is for. This boundary is to keep undesirable things out. So even though it might be about them, it's oh wait yeah, so they're basically sort of saying that, you know, you're the one that's nuts and not me, kind of thing. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to pull me down with your lies because my truth is too much of a threat to you. That equals I'm significant, important, powerful, I'm great, sort of thing. So they actually like confrontation because of these moments where they can self-promote, and they prefer confrontations more than just people who agree with them, like friends, for example. They'd rather have enemies than to have friends. This is why ghosting would hurt so much, because they got no one to play with. You cease to exist. They have no influence or power.
By keeping it separate, even though they might have the capability to perceive it, as seen when you catch them out in their arguments and force them to see it, they use interpretation to recontextualize and avoid having to own it, like an allergic response, because to them it is toxic. There is so much more to cover. Although we've been looking at perception of unhealthy, abusive types of people, it's important to study, as it's potentially a slippery slope if you're not careful. Please don't freak out, and it's normal to do a little checking in on you.
Okay, yeah. So we're closing up there. So to avoid the misdirection, avoid the slippery slope, what do we need to practice? Self-awareness, education, a bit of a slap off reality. It might be painful, but hey, you need it. Be calm, think, test, allow yourself to be vulnerable, question. And there's a whole bunch of other things you could probably do, but stuff like that. So that's the end of that video. Okay, and that's the end of my additional notes to add to that. I really apologize. It's taken, Jesus, an hour and a half. How the hell did I turn a 10-minute video or 11, 12-minute video into an hour and a half? Well, that's good in a way, because that means I can have another stream about this topic with another hour and a half nattering. So yeah, I wanted to throw in the footnotes that I had to omit, because otherwise that 10-minute video would have been a lot longer. And I think pretty much there's no point going into the next section. I might as well leave that for another stream. So we'll generally thank you all for being here. We'll wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. So now I know a lot of that was about behaviors and observations, but we're trying to remind ourselves of perception. So the next sections we'll be looking at will be imbalance, being misguided, and a bit of biology, I think. Oh, and filtering. That will probably be enough for another stream. There's more. There's more than that as well. We have manipulation to talk about at some point. Fact checking. So it's just, that's what I was saying. It's a huge Pandora's box of conversations. Okay, so I'll get some of these comments. Not many, I suppose. 6 of you here. Yes, and yeah. So you can come to any conclusion you like if you cherry pick the data. Right on. So, but admitting when you're wrong is adulting, something women and some men find foreign. It's a bit of an uncomfortable one, but it's. I think it's one of those things that maybe initially, but once you kind of get used to once you realize that, hey, actually it's not too bad. Like I'm not going to get slaughtered for admitting I was wrong and saying sorry or something like that. It doesn't have to be such a horrendous ordeal. Just kind of do it, and you'll be surprised afterwards. It's like, it's a lot easier than I thought. So our perception can magnify. We could turn something that is actually quite trivial and should really be quite easy. It shouldn't be an ordeal. Our perception can magnify and turn it into a monster. But if we're able to so I don't want to sound corny, but like be brave enough to actually do it, sort of thing. And we find out, our perception we can change, and we can shift our way of looking at things. And there's that quote that goes, if you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change. So yeah, just be a bit more mindful with perception. Because the being adamant can lock you into a point of view where, if you're not careful, it can be detrimental. Oh, there we go. So yeah, I like finding out when I'm wrong. It means I'll be right more often. This is it's all parallel. See, the way I grew up was always being told I was wrong. So there's a lot of self-doubt, if I'm honest. And I'd rather when I'm making my notes and I'm writing my stuff, this is kind of like an insider look into Billy's psychology or whatever. When I'm coming up with my notes, most people want to be right. I'm actually hoping to be wrong. So I'm trying to like, if I could deny, I would love it, sort of thing. But I find it hard to deny. So, or at least very uncomfortable. So whenever I'm writing or coming up with my theories and things like that, I don't want it to be true. You mean you're telling me there's another world, a fantasy world, and we're all screwed and fucked and all this? Oh my God. You mean this is all, So yeah, and as a result, well, sometimes I can't deny it anymore. It's like, that must be the case. That's what I am observing. Sounds silly, but it's the best way of contextualizing it. There it is. Oh, yes, yeah. The karma piranha come nibble you on the butt. Okay, Keeping says, knowing you're wrong is only the start. Free bird. Correction. The betterment is the solution to not repeating the same silly human error, not even looking at repentance or morality yet. Lots of nuance. Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying at the beginning of this stream. There's going to be a lot of spin-off topics you could take for if you guys looking for some conversations to have, take any of these little points and go off and spin off and run with the ball or whatever. Gotta love it. No one gets out alive. Well, and that's the thing. So with the mentally ill, they found a loophole. They found a cheat out of this. You cannot kill that which is already dead, sort of thing, right? So you can't get out alive. You can if you never live in the first place. And that's what happens. You eject out of reality. You perceive reality as too dangerous, and you perceive a alternative reality as salvation, freedom, escape from danger. But the cost is you don't have a sense of self, which they're happy because to them it's of no value anyway. It's like a win-win transaction, and you don't have a life. Who you are is that fantasy. You become a deluded set of false beliefs. That's what you are as an entity. Sometimes they'll talk about entities. Well, that's it. That's like, I'm not a fucking entity, but when you're in the dream world, that's what you are. So yeah, so it turns out you can get out of living if you never live in the first place. And it's a little bit like that sort of sentiment of like, it's better to love and to have lost or never to have loved at all kind of thing. Oh, Kush is off. He's probably already gone. So thank you, Kush, for stopping by, and happy flight and your trip. Yeah, okay. So thank you. Yeah, yeah. I apologize. It wasn't the best of streams, I know. But the next one we won't be doing a commentary on a video. Maybe that was the reason why it was a bit of a meh. We'll actually be reading off some notes. So thank you all for having the patience of listening. Hope that was useful. Hope there were some interesting points there. Get your gears thinking. That's basically all I'm asking here. Just exercise those brain cells and ponder and think and question, be curious, and that's how you're gonna help grow and stuff, in my opinion. And I'll see you all again soon, I guess. So take care. Adios.